Hello and welcome to the second lecture on presence, immersion and embodiment. In today's lecture, we will carry on our journey from where we left in the last lecture. In the last lecture, we touched on all three concepts of presence, immersion and embodiment. In today's lecture, we will focus more on embodiment, continuing our journey, whereas in the last lecture, we were focusing more on presence. So, presence dealt with being there, being in the virtual world, that you are present in the virtual world and you are able to do something in it or enjoy it. Now, we will have a greater sense of presence in the sense that we will be someone who is there. So, embodiment is the concept of being someone in there. So, the real question that we are exploring in this lecture is, well, can a person feel that a virtual body is their own body? Can VR environments give that kind of feeling that you are embodying that virtual body? So, at the end of today's lecture, you will be able to explain embodiment in detail and self representation. You will be able to describe the concepts of ownership, agency and self location, which are crucial for embodiment. You will be able to explain major embodiment illusions. You will be able to also analyze how avatars influence human behavior, and you will be able to apply embodiment principles in immersive design. So, let us revisit the XR experience triangle, which we were talking about in the last lecture. We discussed that presence dealt with what the user experiences, and immersion is something that the system provides. On the other hand, embodiment is how the user is experiencing themselves in the VR or AR world. So, it is the focus here is on themselves. The focus in immersion is on what the system is able to provide for you, and the focus in presence is what you are experiencing. So, here the focus is on themselves or yourself. So, presence answers where am I, what is the location, am I there. Okay. Embodiment answers who am I. Okay. So, there might be, for instance, in a virtual world various avatars of humans in there, and whether you are able to identify yourself in your own avatar. So, it answers who am I. Now, big question is, well, why does it matter at all and why should we study about it? Well, embodiment influences various things. It influences your learning outcomes within the VR environment or AR environment, your motor performance, how you perform when you are enjoying that virtual world, your interaction. If you are feeling embodied, then your interaction with others will be more natural, for instance. It also can create empathy in you for others. We will see how. Embodiment can influence your decision making. It can also influence how you form an identity about yourself, not only in the virtual world, but also in the real world. So, if we consider an example of a trainee physician who is interacting through a virtual clinician avatar, it often behaves differently than when observing the same scenario as an external viewer. So, when you take on that avatar within the virtual world as a clinician, you will tend to behave differently than if you just learned the scenario by observing it as an external viewer in a classroom. So, indeed embodiment matters when it comes to, for instance, learning. We will see how it also influences the other various outcomes. So, let us define embodiment. Embodiment refers to the sensation that a virtual body, body part or representation belongs to oneself. The feeling that this virtual character that you are seeing on screen inside the display of your head mounted display or headset, that this virtual body actually belongs to you, and that may not be your entire body. It might be just a virtual hand which you see as your own hand, or a virtual body which you see as your body, or a robotic surrogate which is an extension of your own self. So, all of these are examples of embodiment. It is helpful to understand the human body schema if we are to understand embodiment. So, we as humans, our brain maintains an internal representation of our body, that is where my hands are, where my eyes are, where my nose is. So, if I get a signal that my nose is itching, I go and do this because I know that my nose is here. So, this representation tells us about our limb position, about our body orientation, whether we are facing to the front, to the side, in which direction we are oriented, what are the boundaries of our body, where does our body end and the rest of the world starts, and what are the capabilities that we have in terms of movement, how can we use our body to move around in the world. So, this internal body model is also known as the body schema. Now, XR systems have the capability, and it has been shown through scientific research that they can temporarily modify this body schema. We will see examples of how that occurs. So, it is helpful also to understand in this context the difference between body schema, which we defined in the last slide, and body image. So, body schema is nothing but your unconscious sensory motor representation of yourself, how your sensory motor, the sensory motor system or your sense system and your motor system has a representation of your own body. For example, knowing where your hand is without looking. So, I know where my hand is, and so I am able to use my hand to pick up different objects in the real world. If I did not, then I would be searching for my hand first. Then there is the concept of body image. Body image is different from body schema. Body image is the belief, the conscious belief that we have about our body and the perception about one's body. Now, this may be influenced by also what people think of you. For instance, feeling tall compared to others, or feeling short or strong or weak. So, that is the image you have of your body as it is now. Now, XR has the potential to influence not only the body schema, but also the body image. So, where does embodiment emerge from? Well, embodiment emerges from integrating four things. Okay. First is vision, that is what I see, then is touch, which is what I feel, then is proprioception, which we have touched on in the previous lectures, which is where my body is, then the vestibular inputs, which is how I move. Consistency among these cues is critical to embodying the user well in a virtual world. There are three components we can identify for embodiment. One is that of self location, which tells me where am I. The second component is that of agency, what is it that I am controlling, and the third is that of ownership, which is what body belongs to me. So, there are three components. It is about your self location, which is closely related to presence. Then there is agency, which is related to what can I control in that virtual world, and the third is that of ownership, which is about what body belongs to me. So, these three components form the foundation of embodied experience. Let us talk about these three components now in detail. First, we talk about self location. Self location is the feeling of occupying a specific position in space. For example, in VR, users may feel physically located inside a virtual operating theater. So, as a designer, you need to think about various things when you are designing a virtual world for self location. You want to be creating ideally a first person perspective if possible, although third person perspectives have their own value as well. If you give a first person perspective, the users view the world through their own eyes or the eyes of the avatar, just like you would in the real world. You also need to take care of head tracking, so that you feel yourself located appropriately in the world. So, if I turn my head to the left or to the right, the display must show me what I would normally see to the left or right. Then I feel myself located well within that virtual world. Otherwise, if the virtual world is just moving with me, and as I turn my head, I am not seeing a change in scenery, then I will soon realize that it is artificial. And the third thing you want to be thinking about as a designer is that the viewpoint must update with the location of the user. Next, we talk about agency. Agency is a feeling that I am causing a certain action. So, for instance, moving your hand and seeing a virtual hand move simultaneously. So, if you move your hand and there is a virtual hand which is representing your hand in the generated world or the virtual world, then you will feel that that virtual hand actually belongs to you, because if you moved your hand and that virtual hand also moved, that means it must be representing you. You soon start feeling that connection with that virtual hand which is located in the virtual world. So, to have that agency, again we need low latency, which means if I make a movement and that hand moves instantaneously within a few milliseconds, then I might feel that yes, it was my movement which caused that hand to move. Otherwise, if that hand moves, let us say a second or 2 or 3 seconds later, then it might be the motion of somebody else. So, I may not feel that connection with that virtual hand. We also need accurate tracking. So, if I move my hand 90 degrees like this, then that hand must also move 90 degrees. If it moves only 45 degrees, then I will not sense that that hand actually did what I did. Okay. So, the tracking must be accurate to be able to do that. And thirdly, it must have predictable outcomes, which means let us say I am trying to grab something and that virtual hand is getting close to the object. If I would normally lift it in the real world, let us say it is a duster, then that duster in the virtual world should also lift. If it does not, then I will feel that it did not do what I would normally expect it to do in the real world. So, I will lose that sense of feeling that that hand is actually operating just like my hand. So, again all of these are things that as a designer you need to think carefully about. The third component of embodiment is ownership, and ownership is essentially the feeling that this body is my body, and this is probably the most important component of embodiment. Getting a user to feel that that body which they are seeing in the virtual world actually represents them. Now, this can occur even when the virtual body differs from the real body. So, the virtual body does not have to be a complete mock-up of you with the exact same features that your body possesses. It can be different, okay, but you may still feel a connection with it. So, this ownership can emerge even within seconds if the conditions are appropriate. So, as a designer, it is your cleverness as to how you can get people to create an avatar of themselves which they feel immediately owns them. So, indeed there is a relationship between all of these three components. Ownership, agency and self location are related, but they are also distinct. So, user may experience agency without ownership. For instance, in a first person shooter game, you might be able to move a pistol and let us say shoot at various targets. So, you might have some agency, and it might be that pistol is actually able to do what you want it to do. So, you might feel that you are able to have some action in that virtual world of your own, but you may not have ownership of, you may not feel ownership with that pistol or the hand that is holding that pistol. You might also sense ownership without strong agency. So, you might feel that the avatar represents you, but it is not able to do what you would be able to do in the virtual world, or a user may experience both simultaneously. So, you might sense both ownership as well as agency. Let us recollect the rubber hand illusion which we have been talking about in previous lectures. It is one of the most influential experiments in embodiment research, and that is why we keep coming back to it. Here of course, you will recollect that we keep the real hand hidden, we keep a fake hand visible, and then both are stroked simultaneously, and many participants report ownership of that fake hand. Now, big question is, why does it work? Why is it that you do not immediately feel that that rubber hand is artificial, it does not belong to you, and when a hammer comes down on it, you should show no reaction? Well, that is because the brain receives a visual cue which sees a hand being touched, and it gets a tactile feel of I feel touch. So, you are getting touched on your right hand as well, and you are getting touched on your left hand as well, but the left hand is down and the rubber hand is up, and because your right hand is actually being touched, and we are only mimicking touching of your left hand. As the motions are synchronized, the brain concludes that that hand must be my hand, and soon after it has sort of been fooled into thinking that that rubber hand belongs to you. When the hammer comes down, they actually start reacting to it. So, there are some important lessons here for XR designers. The rubber hand illusion demonstrates that ownership is flexible, that ownership is not only just about owning your own body, that your body representation is also adaptable. It does not have to be a very natural presentation or a presentation which actually mimics what you look like, and that synchrony is critical. So, these principles directly inform XR design. Now, let us look at how the rubber hand illusion is used in virtual reality. A good example of that is what is known as the virtual hand illusion. It is the XR adaptation of the rubber hand illusion. Here users may view a virtual hand instead of a rubber hand. So, in the rubber hand experiment, there was nothing in terms of display, it was just a physical rubber hand that you are fooled in thinking was your own hand. Here there is a virtual hand. So, the virtual hand illusion is essentially that this virtual hand is similar to your rubber hand, it is actually representing your real hands. So, research shows that these virtual hands also have strong ownership transfer, just like that of the rubber hand. Other than specific body parts being represented in virtual reality, there are also full body ownership illusions that you may be able to develop. Ownership can extend beyond your individual limbs. So, users may experience entire virtual human bodies or non-human avatars even. So, avatars that may even be animals, for instance, or robots. Okay. So, users may feel a connection with those as well as their own bodies. They may soon start thinking that the entire body of that animal or that robot actually is the same as their own. There is experimental evidence to prove this. Studies have demonstrated that people can get ownership over child avatars, elderly avatars, giant avatars, animal avatars. So, this reveals the remarkable flexibility in terms of body representation that we can achieve in virtual reality. So, what really is an avatar? Avatar is something like this. It is a digital representation of the user. Avatar design represents influences not only embodiment, but also your presence. Your social behavior may also be influenced in XR due to the avatar representation. It can also affect how you perform within that virtual world. So, if you feel a good connection, then your performance in the XR world may also improve. We briefly talked about first person avatars. These are different from third person avatars. In first person avatars, you feel a strong ownership with that avatar. In a third person avatar, you get a strong overview of what is going on in the virtual world. You may not feel a strong ownership. In first person avatars, you have a high degree of embodiment. In third person avatars, you have a better situational awareness of your presence in the virtual world. The interactions of a first person avatar tend to be natural, and the interactions of a third person avatar tend to be of the type of easier observation. So, if you create a third person avatar, it can move around and it can actually have agency within a virtual world to see from different locations. So, it can get some kind of a bird's eye view of the virtual world. So, when it comes to realism and embodiment, how realistic can embodiment get and whether it is important? Well, so the big question is, well, should avatars be photorealistic? Research suggests that you do not really have to create photorealistic avatars. What is important to create a sense of realism about the avatar you are embodying is synchrony of motion, that your motion is synchronized with the avatar. Realism in terms of behavior, how the avatar behaves is similar to how you would behave. So, Let us say you are in a social XR experience and the users are cracking a joke. Normally, you as a person may be tempted to laugh at that joke, for instance, or you may frown at that joke. So, whatever normal behavior you would have in the real world, if that is also shown by the avatar, then you will feel that there is realism in the behavior of the avatar. The third factor is that of consistency, that is, the behaviors of the avatar or the effects that you show on the avatar must be consistent from one scenario to another if the same situation is replicated. So, if that consistency is lacking and the avatar does not do the same things in situations that are replicated, then you may lack connection with that avatar and may lose your sense of embodiment with the avatar. So, digging a bit deeper into the topic of realism and avatars, as realism increases, usually your comfort level with the avatar and your embodying of the avatar will increase. However, after a while it may suddenly decrease and then increase again. So, when it suddenly decreases, we call that what is known as the uncanny valley. So, here you can see comparisons of various avatars and how familiar or how comfortable you feel with that avatar. With an industrial robot, the human likeness is quite low and so your familiarity level is also low. Now, as the realism goes up, for instance, when you come closer and closer to a stuffed animal, your familiarity may become higher, and then when you come closer, when it becomes even more realistic, such as a corpse or a prosthetic hand, suddenly your comfort level decreases, and then after a while it may start increasing again. So, the familiarity that you have with avatars is different if you are moving or still. So, you can see in the dotted line that the familiarity is higher if the avatar is actually moving, but then the dip here in the uncanny valley is also much higher. So, here you can see an humanoid robot which is actually able to move in the real world, and that has a higher degree of familiarity and realism for a human as compared to an industrial robot which typically cannot move. And then suddenly for moving objects as well, you will see that for a zombie the comfort suddenly has come down to be the least. So, you do not want to be a brain eating human. And then when we come back to a healthy person that is moving, then you have the highest level of comfort. So, near human avatars can sometimes appear unsettling. So, the implication of this as a designer is that you may not always target photorealism, it is not always desirable. The next key concept to think about is the proteus effect. This refers to users adapting behavior according to avatar characteristics. So, if you have a certain characteristic in the avatar and the avatar is doing certain things in the virtual world, suddenly the user also adapts his or her behavior according to the avatar characteristics. So, taller avatars for instance might improve your own confidence, attractive avatars may make you more sociable even in the real world in addition to the virtual world, and professional avatars may also influence how you make decisions in the real world. So, that is referred to as a proteus effect, which is that you adapt your behavior according to your avatar's characteristics, and that actually has implications for you as well. So, embodied experiences are quite useful in XR because they improve your ability to acquire skills in the virtual world. It may also improve your retention of knowledge because you have an interactive environment where you are feeling embodied in that avatar. You may also learn different procedures, for instance, for working on various machines. So, it also helps with procedural learning. An example of how embodiment is closely related to learning is that of training for surgery in virtual reality. So, we have talked about this in past lectures as well. So, as a doctor or a nurse who has to perform in operation theaters, if you feel embodied in the avatar that is representing you in a virtual world, then you might be able to train better for surgery, for instance. Embodiment is also closely linked to how you feel empathy with others. So, embodiment can help users experience alternative perspectives from the eyes of different people or different living beings. So, this has applications in various areas such as aging simulation. So, you may feel empathy, for instance, with people in different age groups, perhaps an older father or maybe a child. It may also be helpful in simulating disability and helping people empathize with people who may have disabilities, and can also help with diversity training in terms of helping you feel the world from the eyes of various racial groups, ethnicities, and so on and so forth. So, a very interesting experiment was carried out by B and other lab, which showed how you can actually experience body swapping, and you may actually be able to see the world through the lens of another gender. So, we will now play this video. So, here people have explored how VR can teach empathy. You can see the lady putting on a headset, where she can actually sense the body of somebody from another gender who has also put on an headset, is on the other side of the screen. So, there is a camera on her headset as well as on the headset of the male participant, and is essentially carrying the images of the other participant into your visual display and making you feel as if it is you. So, as you make hand movements, the other person also makes this identical hand movements, and you suddenly start feeling the world through the eyes of a person from another gender. So, this experiment was carried out quite successfully, and people indeed did feel that they could for some time be in the body of somebody from another gender. So, as one user stands up, the other user also stands up, and you can see what you are seeing through the display. So, you are tempted to think that it is your own image on a mirror that you are seeing, but it is actually the image of the person who is on the other side. So, although normally you would see your own image in the mirror, now you are seeing the image of somebody else who is from the other gender, and you are slowly starting to feel that it is that person's body that you are inhabiting. So, indeed such experiments have been carried out quite successfully. So, here there are actually 4 steps. First, a participant experiences movements and narrative are recorded. So, that is capturing it, and then another participant wears a VR headset and experiences the world from the recorded participant's perspective, and then visual, auditory and bodily cues are synchronized to create a sense of inhabiting another person's body. And then participants at the end of the study reflect on how experiencing another person's perspective influences their understanding and attitudes. So, this kind of embodiment has been used in rehabilitation, for instance, for stroke recovery, for phantom limb treatment for people who may have had a limb amputation, for instance, motor retraining. So, all of these examples have shown that embodied feedback helps recover faster. So, indeed embodiment can have great implications for medical science. Now, the question remains of how do we measure embodiment if we can't measure, then we will not be able to improve on the representations that we are creating within the virtual world. So, there are 4 methods typically used. One is that of questionnaires, where you use some ownership scale and ask the users to rate themselves on how much ownership they felt with the avatar on a scale of, let us say, 1 to 5. Then you could use behavioral measures, where the users movement adaptation is traced. Are they able to adapt their movements according to what the avatar is doing in the virtual world? The third measure is that of physiological measure. So, if you measure signals from the human body such as skin conductance, then you will be able to measure the embodiment well. The fourth method is that of using performance measures, and that is whether you are able to carry out the tasks that you are supposed to in the virtual world by embodying the avatar. So, as a designer designing for embodiment, you want to be maintaining low latency, you want to be ensuring motion synchrony, you want to be providing consistent multisensory cues, you want to be using appropriate avatar representations, and you want to be supporting meaningful interactions of the avatar in the virtual world. So, if you take care of these 5 aspects, then you will get closer and closer to embodying the user well in the virtual world. As a designer, you should also pay attention to some ethical considerations such as identity manipulation that can occur by using these avatars. So, people's own identity may get transformed, and is that going to be positive for them or negative for them? As a designer, you should think about this ethical question, whether it can actually be influenced by bias, whether the avatars that you are designing is a product of your own bias that you are trying to transfer into some other person, whether it can influence their behavior in a certain way that is not probably beneficial to society, or whether it actually violates any aspect of their privacy. So, as XR becomes more and more immersive, although these interesting experiments have been conducted by researchers, and you as a student of this course may be also drawn into doing research in this field, it is important that these ethical issues are also taken care of, and there is research into it and there is work into it. So, that when designers design immersive environments where avatars embody other people, then the ethics are well taken care of. So, finally, let us talk about integrating all of these 3 concepts that we have been talking about in these 2 lectures: immersion, presence and embodiment. We know that immersion provides sensory capabilities, presence creates the feeling of being there, and embodiment creates the feeling of being someone there. Together they create powerful immersive experiences. So, what you need to do as a designer is to integrate them together in your system design. Let us end with a case study of a virtual clinical training. A trainee, for instance, is interacting with a virtual patient through a clinician avatar. You can give this trainee immersion if you create a realistic environment in the virtual world. For instance, the environment that you would find in a hospital room. So, let us say a nurse is doing triage of a patient. If you can create a room that looks similar to what you would experience in a hospital, then you would get a realistic environment which will create immersion for the user when he is being a trainee nurse. You want to be feeling located in the clinic. So, this clinic should be this room, for instance, where the triage is going on, may be part of a bigger hospital environment or a clinic, which is similar to what you would see in the real world. That will give you a sense of presence in there. Thirdly, you must feel like a healthcare professional. If you can get the user to feel like a healthcare professional with the exact sort of tools they would get in a clinic or a triage room, then they will feel that they are well embodied. For instance, you may give them clothes to wear in the avatar, which would represent the blue clothes, for instance, which a nurse would wear in a clinic. The result would be a more realistic behavior that you would get in this virtual clinical training environment, and improved learning, as they feel that this represents similar scenario that is similar to their real world what they would experience. To summarize this lecture, embodiment extends beyond presence. Ownership, agency and self location are fundamental to creating embodiment. Our brain's body representation surprisingly is quite flexible, and it can take on various avatars, and these avatars influence perception and behavior that we experience from the users of the avatars. So, embodiment, it is indeed a very powerful design tool in XR. Looking ahead, we will now move on to spatial cognition in the next lecture. We will learn about how humans navigate virtual spaces, we will talk about building mental maps, understanding scale and distance, and remembering locations. So, these questions form the basis of spatial cognition exam, and we will discuss them next. So, with that, I thank you for your attention and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.